Go.
Side by side.
Good evening, everyone. Forgive me. It is May 6th, 2024. We're here for a special meeting and work session of the City Council. And I'll begin with the notice of the special meeting, City Clerk.
Notice is hereby given that a special meeting and work session of the Laramie City Council will be held Wednesday, May 8th, 2024 at 6:00 p.m. at 406 Ivinson Avenue, Council Chambers, and via Zoom meeting ID number 843-2951-3219, passcode 757436 for the following purpose. Special meeting, call to order, roll call, public comment on non-agenda related items, capital budget amendments, and 5, adjourn. Work session will include the recommended budget.
Thank you, City Clerk. I'll call the special meeting to order and ask you to please call the roll.
Gabriel.
Here.
Newman.
Here.
O'Doherty.
Here.
Pierce.
Here.
Richardson.
Here.
Shumway.
Here.
Somerville. Absent. Cumby.
Here.
Harrington.
Here.
That's 8 present and 1 absent, Your Honor.
Thank you, City Clerk. We'll move to public comment. If there's members of the public wishing to speak to the council on any item not on the agenda this evening, you can come forward in the room, please. Oh, the difference a day can make.
And I left my tomato.
Okay. Close public comment. We'll move on to amendments to the Capital Investment and Construction Plan. Do I need to recognize any staff member for any precursor, or can we just go straight to the amendment?
Mayor, I think Director Wade, if she
Great.
has anything to say, and I'm just going to tell you, my computer is locked up, so I'm going to have to sample the amendments anyway, so I try to get this better.
Good thing Jonathan's in the room. I'm sure he loves this moment. All right. Director Wade, do you have anything to add?
Mayor, I defer to you. There are some recommended staff changes, but you can certainly proceed as you wish in terms of whether you consider the council motions first or hear the staff recommendations.
Director Wade, let's go ahead and start with staff recommendations. I think that's a good place to begin.
Staff recommendations to change the capital budget are very small this year. If we were talking about this in terms of a budget amendment, which it's not, it's a change to the recommendation from your city manager, we would tell you that you've only not seen $22,500. And so most of these changes actually just move money around. A swath of these changes move money more or less between fiscal years. We had initially projected that we would need appropriations for Ivinson Avenue design in 2025. But as some of you may remember, you actually approved a bid award for Ivinson Avenue design just maybe a month ago. And so we actually need those appropriations to be in 2024. So we are removing them from the recommended 2025 amount. Now they do still live in 2024, so there's not really a change in the amount you saw. But where you're going to notice that from a budgetary standpoint is in our year-end carry-forward amendment, which is different now with our new software system. And so instead of all of these manual rebudgets that you've been used to for years, you will approve as a council, you'll consider and approve as a council a recommendation for the carry-forward amendment sometime in September for all of those rebudgeted amounts. So that's a little bit different than it has been before. The other change moves projects in between funds and reduces appropriations from wayfinding and moves them to 3rd Street beautification to allow for consolidated management of the 3rd Street beautification project in the Capital Projects Fund, as well as a budget of $670,105, which Assistant City Manager Feeser feels will help him accomplish his objectives much more than the original budget of $270,105. But we're really just moving money around between funds. You've already seen that additional appropriation to the wayfinding project in 2025. Now, I would tell you that Assistant City Manager Feaser is not actually reducing the scope of that wayfinding project. He is simply taking appropriations that would have accomplished some of that 3rd Street beautification work and moving them into that 3rd Street project. So I want to reassure you in that way, because I have a feeling that that project is important to several of our council members. Beyond that, we are correcting one budget error that has nothing to do with an amount. We loaded a fleet vehicle into the wrong division, so we're going to get that cleaned up when we give you the adopted budget. And lastly, you're being asked to consider an additional recommendation for a new equipment item for workstations and record organization at the water treatment plant. The facilities out there are, if you've ever been there, they're rather old. They could use some updated office equipment and organization, and Director Webb and Deputy Director Klein submitted this request after we had prepared the recommended capital investment plan for your consideration. That's a summary of staff changes, not very much this year. In total, it's a reduction of $969,395, but that's not the substance of what's actually happening.
Director Wade, does that include the council motion, that 969?
It does not.
Okay, great. So will we need 2 separate motions here, one to approve staff recommendations and then one to
Yes.
consider? Okay, great.
Somebody else want to do that?
Vice Mayor, would you be interested in making that motion that you'll find at the top of your cover sheet? Just to throw something at you on the fly, unless anyone else has it prepared.
I have it in front of me.
I have it ready. I don't have it open.
Okay.
I got it ready.
Okay, Councilor Pierce, please.
Okay, I move to approve the city manager's recommendation for changes to the 2025-2026 capital budget, reducing the FY 2025 recommended budget by $969,395.
Second.
Okay, motion by Pierce, seconded by Shumway. Council members, do you have any questions? I kind of took us out of order there a little bit, but we've already received the explanation. Okay, we'll go to the public on it. If there's any member of the public wishing to speak to this item, go ahead and raise your hand on Zoom or come forward in the room. Yeah, we are gaining momentum on Zoom. Okay, we'll close public comment. Back to the council for any comments before the vote. Okay, City Clerk, please call the roll.
Gabriel.
Yes.
Newman.
Yes.
O'Doherty.
Yes.
Pierce.
Yes.
Richardson.
Yes.
Shumway.
Yes.
Somerville. Absent. Cumby.
Yes.
Harrington.
Yes.
That's 8 yeses, 0 nos, and 1 absent, Your Honor.
Thank you, City Clerk. That item has been approved. I'm going to go to Councilor Doherty for the council changes.
I hope I've got the right document. I move to include $45,000 in each year of fiscal year 2025 to fiscal year 2026 general fund biennium budget to begin installing more robust network of shared lane markings, SLMs, or sharrows on city streets.
Second.
Motion by O'Doherty, seconded by Richardson. Council members, I had asked for this amendment to be included. Following the discussion about lowering speed limits, to me what stuck out as the solution is folks wanted a safer way to ride their bicycles and use maybe sort of other multimodal options for transportation. To me, this was the most cost-effective way to that end, and this includes, you'll see, I won't walk you through sort of the explanation. It addresses the council goals and things like that very well, but we will use is it thermoplastics? Okay, great. Thank you, Brooks. So the markings will last 5 to 7 years. They'll be more permanent than paint. They would have to be repainted often. So asking for $45,000, this just gets us started on that conversation. It is not, I had initially proposed quite specific locations for these that aligned with a map produced by Laramie BikeNet. They have mapped the city for where they believe these should go, and I'm happy to share that with council members, but on the advice of Director Webb, being a little less specific might give the staff a little bit of flexibility on where these land, so that things like the proposal was for 8th Street, but 8th Street does not have a light to cross Grand Avenue, might be worth considering how that adjusts. So there will be some flexibility in this, but I have shared the map with Public Works. Any questions? Counselor Pierce?
Yeah, I think that communication between what Public Works comes up with and what you gleaned from whatever group is going to really be important, because they may just do like rolling through those, as opposed to paying attention to the actual stop sign. And I think it's worth weighing benefits and costs to some of that stuff. And it's important that we, frankly, kind of bend a little bit in terms of paying attention to where that group or where groups are currently riding their bike, if that makes sense. I mean, I get why we might want to, follow more rules, but I also know they're not going to change from 8th to, to 7th. It's not going to happen, because once it's ingrained, it's ingrained. So.
Yeah, and I can't
That
speak.
makes sense.
It does, Counselor Pierce, and I think it's good advice. And I think you're right. They aren't going to, cyclists are using the streets they're using. And so we
Right.
ought to, if they're crossing 8th Street already or crossing Grand on 8th, maybe that's okay. But I did want to leave flexibility in this, because one of my considerations was Garfield Street is sort of one of the corridors that's of import to this plan. But I had originally mapped it from 1st Street to 26th, and maybe it makes sense to go to 15th and not all the way to 26th. And then those blocks of painting could happen somewhere else that may increase sort of like the network in the tree neighborhood, or something where you see sort of more bicycle traffic.
Well, and again, just my experience crossing University, and for years I thought Ivinson was really the road that most bicyclists would be coming from campus into town, or vice versa, but it's not. It's University gets a bucket. Was University on the map? Yeah, which.
It might be Ivinson, but we can look.
But it was like 6, 7 bicycles, just one. I'm like, wow, it was just not even a nice day. They were scooting in front of me, and I'm like, okay, not the intersection I would have picked, right? But apparently it was and is very popular, so must have very few cars.
Thank you, Councilor Pierce. Councilor Doherty?
At Traffic Commission, I learned from some of the bicyclists that they, when I said, oh, I always take 9th because it's flatter, and they're like, no, you take, so they know where people, the
Right.
smarter way to go, where anyway, so I think it's good to keep this flexible, though.
Thank you, Counselor. Other questions, council members? Counselor Gabriel?
How did BikeNet come up with their priorities?
I don't know their process for building this. I would assume it was some sort of, I don't know if it was a public process or sort of like internal to BikeNet. I didn't think much about it because I thought those might be similar groups of people, because it's so heavily cyclists at BikeNet anyway. I can't speak to their process. So I had just asked a former member of the Traffic Commission for any insight she may have. I asked Melanie Arnett for any insight she may have on a direction for increasing sharrows, and she sent me a map. But I will share that with council, and staff has it. So I'm going to go to Councilor Richardson, then O'Doherty.
Yeah, I would just echo the idea that we really kind of lean on where people already are biking, even if it doesn't necessarily feel quite right, because I think it will be a waste of the sharrows if we don't. So.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor O'Doherty.
I just wanted to note that BikeNet is a very big group in this town, isn't it? It's a huge group, so I think it's good representation of the people that take bicycling pretty seriously.
Thank you, Councilor. Other questions? Okay, we'll go to the public on this. If there's any member of the public wishing to speak to this item, go ahead and come forward. If you're in the room, raise your hand if you're on the Zoom call. We'll close public comment. Any comments before the vote, councilors? Councilor Gabriel, please.
Maybe for Director Webb, how extensive will $45,000 be in the city?
I'm glad you have it printed out, because I'd be scrolling through text messages trying to sort this out.
Just kind of curious, the area you intend to cover?
Yeah. Mayor, Council, Gabriel, I threw some quick numbers together. Each thermoplastic Shero is $260. So that gets us 173 Sheros. Standard's about 4 per block. So when you hit an intersection, you need a Shero go in each direction. And then that gets us about 43 blocks. Yep.
And councilors, I would note just by the amendment, this would be 2 years of that construction. Okay. Any other comments, councilors, questions? Okay. City Clerk, please call the roll.
Gabriel.
Yes.
Newman.
Yes.
O'Doherty.
Yes.
Pierce.
Yes.
Richardson.
Yes.
Shumway.
Yes.
Somerville. Absent. Cumby.
Yes.
Harrington.
Yes.
That's 8 yeses, 0 nos, and 1 absent, Your Honor.
Thank you, City Clerk. That has been approved. Is there anything else we need to cover in the special meeting, staff? Okay, Councilor Pierce, I'll move to you for adjournment of the special meeting.
Yeah, thank you. I move that we adjourn our special meeting.
Second.
Motion by Pierce, seconded by Richardson. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say no. Great. Councilors, we're going to convene the work session now, which is the work session on the recommended budget. City Manager, Director Wade.
Thank you, Mayor. So, Council, we will this evening
references to keep everybody working and looking at the same thing. So I'm going to start on what is really, I think, page 1, which is the city manager's message. Council, if you had a chance to read the transmittal letter here, you'll see that in total, the recommended O&M appropriation for governmental funds is $107,807,797. 77% of that is in the general fund, the remainder in the capital construction fund and recreation center fund, and then a little bit in our other funds, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes and remind you what the funds are that we are speaking of. Moving to our proprietary or our business funds, the total recommended appropriation is $87,799,656. And of course, the business and proprietary funds include water, wastewater, and our solid waste management fund. I wanted to draw your attention to just a few high-level things in this letter. The city, I'll remind you, really did make a historic investment, and I know that sounds dramatic, but we did that in January of 2024, and I say historic because in the 20 years of history that I have with this organization, I don't know that we've made an investment of this caliber in terms of trying to ensure that our employees have competitive compensation in terms of salary and benefits. What I want to make sure that we all understand as we talk about the budget for the upcoming biennium is that if we're going to maintain the compensation levels at a competitive rate for this biennium, we're really going to need to monitor workload carefully and make very disciplined decisions about adding workforce into the future because the cost of labor has escalated dramatically. We've made that investment in existing staff, and if we're going to maintain it, we're going to have to be judicious as we consider bringing on additional staff in this biennium. With that said, I did recommend 3 full-time equivalent positions be added in the general fund. We'll get into a little bit more detail about that as we continue talking. Then I also did recommend the continuation of some temporary authorizations that we've come to you in the past for and you've granted in 3 areas: fire department, admin services, and the recreation center aquatics division, and we'll talk about that some more as well. Sorry, I think I just misspoke. Economic Development Department is where a lot of these positions are situated that are permanent, and we'll get into that more. But those are where the 3 full-time equivalents are. Sorry, I'm getting off track. I do want to talk about the Recreation Center just a little bit at a big picture level. So the Recreation Center Fund, as you know, has always received a subsidy out of general tax revenue, out of the general fund. Since COVID in 2020, that subsidy has been remarkable, and you'll get to see those numbers later. And I believe that was necessary at the time to keep the rec center afloat, because the rec center has more of a retail sort of type vibe about it. Walk-in traffic relies on customer revenue. It was decimated from a revenue standpoint by COVID, as were many of our businesses of that nature. But we really do, if we're going to have a sustainable relationship between the Recreation Center Fund and the general fund, we have to bring that back into the right space. And so I've been working with Assistant City Manager Fieser and Recreation Manager Guerin to create a plan, and with our finance team, to bring that subsidy back to where it should be, I believe, which is about 20 to 30% of recreation center operations being subsidized by general fund. It's essential we do that. So anyway, we're working toward that. We'll talk about that some more as well. As we move over and look at the business funds, water fund is, I'm writing this letter, and really I said there's nothing unremarkable from previous years, because there simply is not much to say there. Probably the most interesting thing going on in the water fund, and Councilor Pierce is amply aware of this, is the fact that last night the council voted to agree to allow the lease of the monolith to naturally expire under the contract terms, and that we will spend the next 2 or 3 years, so this biennium and likely a year past that, just really understanding the health of that land, how best to manage it going forward, and then reconsider a lease at a future date. That decision, when I wrote this letter, was as yet uncertain, right? So I'm kind of writing this letter in past history time. And what I said here is that there are not huge budget appropriations recommended in year 1 of this biennium, because I was a little uncertain of where this recommendation would land and if council would agree at the time I wrote this letter, now a month and a half ago or whatever it was. So I expect we are likely to see budget amendments for year 2 related to the Monolith Ranch. And the Ranch Advisory Commission is working through some things. I expect they'll give us some good advice. We envision, rangeland health assessments, management plan for how to move forward on that property. So I don't know if the partnerships we hope to form with the university will help us to accomplish that, or if we're going to need financial resources to do that in the second year of the biennium. I did recommend one position in the water fund. We'll talk about that more. I wanted to move over to the wastewater utility. It is really stable. It is stable, but it is going to need attention in coming years. And when Jen talks about the financial condition, she'll give you a better view of that. But we're going to have to be looking at future rate adjustments beyond what you just did, aggressive grant seeking, and we're going to really need to constrain our capital investments in order to make sure that the wastewater side of that operation is stable in future years. We're at a kind of critical point. You'll recall when we looked at the capital budget, I mentioned to you that the capital plan in the wastewater fund is going to need to be scaled back a bit, and so I'm just echoing that message here. Moving lastly to solid waste, really those services are pretty stable and sufficient in terms of, dollars and cents. I did recommend a couple of amendments we'll talk a little bit more about. And I wanted to close by touching on one-time revenue. Jen is going to talk to you about the one-time revenue that we are receiving from, the industrial wind development around us, and then tangential sales tax that comes in related to that economic activity. What I've recommended in total is that, for the most part, that we make a huge investment in the street system in this biennium using those one-time revenues. And we'll talk more about that and why I think that makes sense. I see the nodding of the heads. I think you guys all agree, and it's in line with your priorities, but we'll talk about the survey of our residents and how that figures into this as well. So that's kind of an overview, and before we get too far, I just want to recognize Director Wade and her finance team here with us tonight, Jennifer Malmberg and Louise Johnson, who are key to putting the budget together, do all the work, look at like they're ready to make sure all of your decisions are well accounted for. So I have to thank you guys, and Spencer Couture is not here, but he also does a lot of work with this and bringing the budget to this sort of really readable and digestible format that we hope we've provided for you and the public. So thank you very much, ladies. Okay, with that, I'm going to move to page 7, if And I guess I would say, if you have questions, I'm happy to take them as we go, but I suspect if they come this early, we'll probably be getting ahead of ourselves, because we'll be talking about or asking about something that's going to come up naturally in the work session this evening. So, but I'm happy to entertain those. So if you move to page 7, the first, say, 19 pages of this document, as you know, are more like just orienting people to our fund structure and to fundamental things about the city. But I did want to point out the organization chart. We have had some, I would say, reorganization within the management team structure, not a lot, but if you are looking for a current org chart, here is how you would look at that. And then I'm going to move to the next page, page 8. This is where we move out of just the org chart and into talking about the City Council, our governing body. I did want to assure you that your goals for the year are taken into account, and there's discussion on these pages about those goals and some looking back to the previous year and then looking at the current year as well. And then if we would move to page 14, I believe it is. And if you have questions on any of these pages, I would just remind you that we're all here to answer them either tonight or in the future. So I wanted to look on page 14 just to show you the schedule of events that lead us to this evening. We start looking at the budget in the fall, working on it through the winter, and then bringing it to you here, and you'll see the schedule there on page 14 of the work that has underlies the budget recommendation. I also wanted to show you on this page where you will see all of the funds listed out there in the left-hand column that are recommended in here, from general fund to more minor funds at the bottom of the list, like the Cemetery Perpetual Care Fund. And more schedule on the following page. And then lastly, I want to go to page 18, which is a fun new addition to our budget process, literally from a procedural standpoint, but also from a thought process standpoint. And I just skipped over it. Let me scroll back up. So as you know, we did the budget survey this year in really the first survey that we've ever published that is directly related to the budget. We've always had questions sort of this nature and ilk in our broad-based community survey, but we've never sort of pulled them out into a separate effort with the citizens. And so I was just so thrilled when I saw what our team had pulled together to collate that data to the recommendations that you see here. You'll see how funding fell out, the recommendation fell out for the first year, FY25, and the second year, the biennium, FY26. And then you can see the citizens' priorities. And it was very interesting and fun to see how they align and how they may differ, and this certainly can inform our decisions in the future and help to inform the recommendation that you have before you. Not surprisingly, our citizens are very supportive of public safety. We've seen that for years and years, and I think that's pretty typical of every city, but we also saw a lot of interest in investing in the street system when it comes to the general government side of our operation. So for instance, at the bottom of that page, I'll just take, for instance, Public Works Administration and Project Services. That is 3% of the annual budget, unfortunately not ranked on the citizen survey. But if you look at, say, streets, the blue highlighted section, you'll see that it is about 8% of our recommended budget and of second priority to our citizens, and they recommended a funding allocation of 18%. Frankly, if we had 18% to recommend, I would recommend that to you too. But we just don't have those resources, but we do have a lot of extra resources with that one-time revenue, so we're making a deep investment there. I wanted to point out, though, other areas where you can see that the amount of money that we're investing into each of these functional lines fairly closely with our citizens' priorities, so that felt affirming in a way. And I guess I would ask Jen if you have anything you want to add there, since your team put the analysis together.
I do have something to add. Thank you for asking. It was really interesting connecting the categories presented on the budget survey with the way that we allocate resources. What was especially interesting is that streets and stormwater are grouped together in the citizen budget survey. And of course, as you know, you're considering the storm drainage utility, which is part of that conversation and part of that ranking differential. So I thought that was really fascinating when I dove into the data, and I would offer that to you.
And I would say, I think that's a lesson learned for us too, that maybe we untie those two, streets and storm drainage, into the future. I think when we built the survey, we left them tied together because we know they come from the same source of funding in the general fund, really. But it might be interesting to tease them apart a little bit from a citizen standpoint as two sort of distinct services. Anyway, that is kind of the introductory material. I don't want to gloss over things too heavily, so again, if you have questions, please feel free. But that takes us to page 20, and if you don't have questions, then we're ready for Director Wade to tell us a little bit about our overall financial position.
Councilors, I just ask if you have questions, just go ahead and shout them out. Councilor Pierce.
Yeah, I don't necessarily have a question, but I think I really appreciate the fact that you did survey the public regarding the budget. From my perspective, I think I would have been a little apprehensive about doing that. I think I would have been like, oh, what are we going to see? So I'm very surprised and very pleased of how it came out. I don't know if I would have had the nerve, personally, to do that.
We definitely learned that slider question is much unloved. So we'll change that next time.
Somewhere.
Right.
All right, back to you all.
Well, Honorable Mayor, City Councilors, we'll dive into the general fund. The lead up into the general fund recommendation will be structured like this. The recommended budget is balanced, and we'll just tell you a story that helps you understand why the city manager's budget recommendation is sustainable moving forward, because that's really important. If we don't talk about those things, really what we're doing in the budget is we're just looking at revenues and expenses or expenditures, and we're not really paying attention to the big question, which is, can we continue to provide government services into the future without interruption to our community, because that really should be our goal. And that's why sustainability is important. It's important in all of our funds, and it's at the city manager's, at the forefront of her decisions when she's making recommendations to you. However, in the general fund, it is particularly critical that we consider sustainability, because 75 to 80% of the revenue in that fund is not controlled by the city of Laramie, meaning that we cannot come to you as a council and ask you to, say, increase a rate because maybe the cost of inflation is eating our lunch, which we all know has been the case not only in the public sector, but in the private sector for the last couple of years. And so you really have to plan your budget in a way that your expenditures hug right below your available revenue. Now remember, the goal of government, just like not-for-profits, we're not here to stockpile reserves. We're not here to make a profit. But when you are planning for a sustainable operation for a period of 10 years or so, you do want your appropriated expenditures to hug just a little bit underneath your estimated revenues to make sure that you don't flip that behavior. And so we're going to talk more about that later. You know, but I'll continue to tell this story for history, that the last time we had to make a budget contraction was in fiscal year 2017. We needed to make that contraction because the state had significant reductions in revenue sources, which trickled down to local governments to the tune of, I believe, around 40%. And in that biennium, we contracted, and the city manager recommended to you a reduced budget that actually did balance ongoing operating revenue with ongoing operating expenditures without reliance on the direct distribution. The few years after that, we grew the budget only slightly, meaning additional appropriations were scarce. Staff did receive some modest increases in compensation, but more or less the budget was held steady until about 2021. Now, when we look at what started to happen in 2021, of course, it's post-pandemic. There was pandemic-related aid, which in the general fund was quite beneficial, especially because we had public safety services. We used a lot of our aid actually to support the recreation center subsidy. And so we've been very lucky, but we also haven't just been lucky, we have been planning. And that's what you want to do if you have a sustainable budget. If you want to have a sustainable budget. This year, as we move forward, we all know that we've experienced several years of intense inflationary pressure that has not just been limited to our supply costs and our capital projects, but also wages. When we received the results, we knew that our compensation matrix was undervalued because we were having a hard time recruiting across the city. But when we received the results of the compensation analysis last fall, we saw how undervalued it was. And so with those operating cost increases, we are making a recommendation to you that we begin relying on a portion of the direct distribution again to fund operating costs. The maximum amount that we feel is acceptable is around 50%, and the recommendation does that is part of the recommendation tonight, is that, you know, the legislature is no longer saying that you cannot use this direct distribution for operating costs, nor do we feel we should use 100% of it for operating costs. But moving forward, especially with the growth in wages, we feel that we may have to start tapping into it again. Now,
Councilor Doherty.
Can I, 50% of what they give us, or 50% of our, what's the 50% of what?
That's a, Honorable Mayor, through you, that's a very good question. I would say 50% of what I would consider our normal amount to be, which is somewhere around 3.6 or 7 million, not the amount that was appropriated this year. Yeah.
Thank you, Councilor. Thanks.
Very good question. What the legislation currently says is that you will not use the direct distribution to increase your staff or to fund compensation increases. It does not say you cannot use it for any operating cost. And so we may not even need to rely on it at all. But with the historic investments that we have needed to make, especially in compensation, it is possible that for the next few years, we will rely on it a little bit until our sales and use tax collections can grow. And I say that to kind of elaborate on the city manager's earlier comment that we will have to be very careful in growing. We have a lot of one-time revenue. I'll talk to you more about that later on. But that can really cloud decision-making if we start to rely too much on that, especially for expenses like personnel. What I'd like to do is talk generally about some improvements we've seen to general fund revenue that since 2019 have started to rewrite the story of scarcity that I would say has been normal for the general fund my entire career here, and probably the city managers. I know Malia's because I feel like my organizational history extends to Malia because she told a lot of stories and I listened to those stories and I learned from them. And so you start to see a big difference in 2019, and I'll show you that today. Not only does our community continue to support the 5th cent tax, without which we could not operate, but in 2018, the 6th cent tax that the community approved entirely benefited general fund capital needs. So remember, if we don't have that specific purpose tax to pay for those items, the general fund either pays or we get further behind and have more deferred maintenance. That was significant. The other thing that has just really started to help rewrite that story is the taxation of online sales. And I guess our spending behavior online, because we all know people spend a lot online. So that happened in 2019. We start to see income in 2020, but it's really hard to see because we're in that pandemic, economic crisis that we all experience. But by 21 and 22, you can start to really see the impact of the taxation of online sales. And then finally, I never thought I'd be saying this for Laramie, but energy development is really benefiting us right now to the tune of about $7 million in one-time sales and use tax collections to date in fiscal year 2024, which is extraordinary for us. I'd like to turn your attention to page 21, to the graph at the top of the second column. And we'll look at both of these graphs. Actually, we'll look at them together to go a little bit faster. The graph on the top is the graph that shows you a 10-year history of operating revenue and expenditures. Now, this is the graph that we would tell you illustrates whether the budget is in structural balance. And so a structurally balanced budget, you would see revenue a little bit over expenditures or vice versa, but you wouldn't see a big gap in between them. What you'll see for the city of Laramie is actually from 2014 to 2017, we weren't in structural balance. It's not because we weren't balanced, we were just using the direct distribution. This graph does not include that. You can see in 2017 and 18, those two lines perfectly marry in the upper graph. That's the budget reduction we did during that time. And then you can see since that time, we have steady growth in expenses. I'd like to make sure you see that, as well as erratic growth in revenue. And you start to see those one-time sales and use tax collections that we've had since 2021. When you look at the total revenue and expenditures chart, it tells a similar but different story. And so from fiscal year 14 to 17, you can see that we actually are in balance still. We're just using everything we had to perform our government services because we had to, because our revenue base was so low. Since that time, because we've had some revenue improvements, the situation has looked better. And we also received in the general fund significant pandemic-related federal aid, which you also would see in this total revenue graph. So lots of changes in particular since 2019. If we look at page 22, at the bottom of that page, I'd like to point out to you the collections table, a table that summarizes sales and use tax collections to date in 2024 for Albany County. When you hear me say collections, I'm always talking about raw county collections. It's not what the city is getting in revenue, because we actually, that number is not as easy to trace out by sector. In fact, it's impossible using Department of Revenue reports. So we have to use these countywide reports. You can see in the utility sector and the other sector growth of 816% and 40%. The growth in the utilities sector is about 23.1 million. That's where all of that additional one-time revenue is coming from. We call the Department of Revenue and our finance team every few months to make sure that we're staying on top of what's one-time, what's ongoing, and they are very much saying to us, look, this is totally one-time. We say, we know, but we are doing our due diligence and we are following up with you. And so when I developed my revenue estimates for 25 and 26, I had to take this into account because this is highly unusual. But let's talk about what is ongoing, because there's some encouraging stuff there too. Accommodation and food services to date is up 10%. That's extraordinary. If we look at online and mail order sales, they're up 30%, and retail trade is up a strong 8%. So very, very good growth in sales and use tax. So it is not just one-time sales and use tax that is growing, but the proportion that our revenue is growing from those ongoing amounts is smaller than what it looks like due to the presence of this one-time revenue. If we look at the next column on page 22, you're going to see the trends in our fund balance. And you're going to see in the past couple of years that fund balance has steadily grown. That's why the city manager can recommend to you elevated investment in capital, because we have had these one-time amounts and we are having increased fund balance. We don't want to use these one-time reserves for operating, but they're a great thing to use for capital. So you noticed in the 2024 recommendation, as in this next biennium, that we do have more recommended for capital than is normal for the city of Laramie. Now, finally, as we look forward to sustainability for next biennium, the budget that the city manager is recommending to you this evening is what I consider to be a sustainable budget. We are not factoring into our revenue forecast any projections for one-time sales and use tax collections, and we remain conservative in what we estimate that ongoing base to be without being overly conservative. Additionally, we are acknowledging to you that we expect we might have to use up to 50% of our normal direct distribution, but that's only if we spend every dime that you appropriate, which is never the case, and only if revenue doesn't come in a little bit higher than we estimate. And so we want to be transparent with you and tell you these things. But the budget before you, while it is more generous than what is normal, it does contain some appropriations for additional positions. I do consider it to be still sustainable. And I am actually very happy to work for an organization that values that work. And I would offer you this before I go on and talk more about general revenue sources. You're going to notice on page 23 our statement to you that the budget is balanced. It's balanced. It's also sustainably balanced. But if you think about where we've been in the past 4 years, with COVID, which was not a small thing, it was kind of a global pandemic, and a staffing exodus, which creates a fair amount of stress for the people who stay, and software projects that change everything, and lots of revenue, it takes a ton of discipline to not just say yes to spending all of that, because there is a way in which that's a stress response, and people come forward and they want to spend their way out of it, and you have empathy for that. But the recommendation before you this evening is not that. It is not certainly everything that was asked for, and does represent a middle ground, and I think that's something that we can all take comfort in and be really proud of, because frankly, normal human behavior is quite the opposite of that. So we'll talk briefly about the composition of general fund revenue. And it always takes the longest to get through the general fund, so I appreciate your patience with me. But because this fund houses so many city services, it's really important that we talk about why we only can recommend a certain amount of appropriations, because it always seems like we need more. We need more streets, we need more storm, we need more everything, right? So we have to understand what our funding limits are. And that's really what my presentation is about. I think there's a question.
Councilor Shumway, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a question about the sales tax on construction. With the millions and millions of dollars going into the university construction, are they not paying sales tax on their? We get nothing for the.
It is, Councilmember Shumway, it is really difficult to obtain information about sales and use tax collections. So all I can tell you is what the Department of Revenue signals out for us when we call, and they have never highlighted those construction projects as a reason for these elevated collections. So if they are going on, it is not something that I am aware of, but that does not mean that it is not buried in collections somewhere for ways in which it may be taxed.
Thank you, Councilor. Other questions while we're halted? Okay. Councilor Pierce, please.
Yeah, not so much a question, but a comment. I really appreciate the caution related to the distribution funding. I think that's really, really important. And just to share with other council members, not so many years ago, a comment was said, I don't know, I mean, I was in the room. Anyway, it was about, we have to take advantage of every opportunity the state gives us to collect funds, which is really important, which is why we're focusing on drainage, utility-ish type stuff, because we have to do that in order to say to them, well, you've given us this piece of legislation or this opportunity, and we've taken advantage of that, and we've done that, and we've asked our community to pitch in and pay and do whatever. So that's important, and it's also really, really important, and so much appreciated by me, and I suspect council, that real care related to state distribution, because it's here today and potentially gone tomorrow. So, and we all know that, just to get on a little bit of a soapbox, but, Laramie is not perceived so well, and nor are our distributions equal to other communities in this state. And I think that's something, as a council, we need to tell our constituents more and more that, we can't rely on it like other communities do, because it's in flux. And, frankly, our perception is not so great when it comes to their generosity. So I'll just leave it at that.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Shumway.
Mayor, I would like to point out that on this direct distribution, there's only one city of the 99 that are not a member of WHAM. It's Rock Springs. They recommended to the governor that he cap the direct distribution at 110 million, and then WHAM went to bat, and as you well know, we got, what was it, 146 million, which shows that there's really a need for us to do something to keep Rock Springs from messing up what we have worked so hard to accomplish.
I'm with you, Councillor. I'm with you. All right. Any other questions, comments while we're... All right. Director Wade, back to you. Thank you.
All right, let's launch into a profile of the general fund revenue. We'll talk more about the direct distribution then, to maybe provide a little bit more information about some of our council members' points. General fund revenue by category, it's not shocking, it's what the composition of the fund is. It's somewhere between 75 and 80% of the revenue each fiscal year, like clockwork, is intergovernmental in nature. Intergovernmental means sales and use taxes, direct distribution, severance taxes and mineral royalties. So sales and use taxes, of course, can go up with economic conditions. They can also go down with economic conditions, but the rest of these revenue sources are subject to distribution formulas, and the city does not control this revenue. So it's a huge, huge component, 75 to 80% of the revenue in this fund that supports many of our core government operations. When we dive further into what this 75 to 80% is, we see that in 2023, around 60% of it was sales and use taxes, and around 13% of it was the direct distribution. So those two items together are around 75% of intergovernmental revenue, which is 75% of all revenue in the general fund. And so sometimes I feel like people wonder, why do we talk about the direct distribution so much? And why do we talk about sales and use taxes so much? Well, that's why. Because they really are funding many governmental services in the general fund. If we look at the chart on page 24, second column, I want to look at the intergovernmental revenue trends chart with you. This chart sings the same old song. You see that those intergovernmental revenue sources remain mostly stable from 2014 to 2019. That's why the city manager couldn't recommend much growth in the budget to you, because we didn't have a lot of additional revenue to fund increases in operations. You also see that starting in 2020, sales and use tax in particular begins to grow by leaps and bounds. And so that's where our additional resources are coming from. Again, the issue is determining what is ongoing of that. But I love this graph, it's very telling. If we turn to page 26, we'll see a similar chart for sales and use taxes. You're going to see exactly the same thing, so I'm not going to go into detail, but you might find the chart on this page useful. And then our favorite table, which shows the per capita collection of the 4-cent sales and use tax. You're going to see that even in a year where we had 2.6 million in one-time collections, we are still 4th lowest in the state for per capita revenue. And so I actually look at this chart sometimes as a cautionary tale, because it feels like we have so much, because relative to what we've had, we do. But it is not true. It is still short. what many communities work with to fund core governmental services, which also necessitates conservatism, in my opinion. Another key source of revenue, although it's smaller for the general fund, is property tax. What I'd like to say about property tax is I think we're all aware of how many bills, pieces of potential legislation there were before the legislature this year that would have, in one way or another, reduced property tax revenue to governments of various sorts, not just the city of Laramie. The legislation that passed that we think is most impactful is House Enrolled Act 44, which provides for the exemption of 50% of the assessed value of residential real property to owners who meet certain criteria. So 65 years and older, have lived in Wyoming and paid taxes for, I think, 25 years, and the property is the primary residence. I think I got that right. So we know that this legislation was adopted. What we don't know is how that's going to impact revenue. And so when we look at the forecast for 25 and 26, you're going to see that it is less than what I expect that we are going to receive this year. And it's for this reason, and I just want to make sure I point that out. I plan to adjust up my forecast in 2026 if I have shot a little conservatively, and honestly, I always hope that I do, because that is part of my job. Now, let's talk about the direct distribution, because we know we have to. What is fascinating, and I love this table, we all know the journey of the direct distribution at this point, that Laramie used to receive a more hardship-related component that went away, so we get less of it than we used to, and that became particularly noticeable after a couple formula changes ago. There's a table at the top of page 29 that illustrates this point, and this table is here for you, Council, because I know that you like to see this information. What I'd like to show you is that for the Joint Appropriations Committee initial recommendation of $105 million, so less than the governor's initial recommendation for the year, but this is what I could find estimates for. Had we received that $105 million for 25 and 26, our direct distribution this year would have been about $3.4 million. Now, rewind to 2021 and 22, our direct distribution would have been $4.1 million, same biennium appropriation. And that's where you see the new formula coming into play with less hardship, more reward for communities with economic volatility, and resources really going to different places, and resources really going more into the hands of research-rich communities as opposed to lower per capita collection communities. So the same thing that we have been seeing would have played out this year. Another good reason for caution. Beneath that table, there is also a chart that illustrates the journey of the direct distribution this year, because it kind of did bounce around from a governor's appropriation, from the governor's recommended appropriation of 110 down to 105 with joint appropriations, back up to 110, and finally at 146.25, which is a boon not only for the city of Laramie, but other communities. So we will receive $4.9 million per year of the biennium, which is significantly more than we have been.
Yeah, can we go back to the property tax a little bit? What, and I know I've asked this question before, but what percentage of the city's budget is collected or is part of the property tax? Because I know Albany County is really dependent on property tax. I'm just curious how much.
It's less than 10% for sure. It's probably 7%, and I am very much just calculating that on the fly, so it's somewhere around that.
Okay.
Yeah. It's fairly small.
That's what I thought.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So even with the potential.
Oh, sorry, no.
Okay, even with the potential changes or flux in the whatever benefit they passed, it shouldn't impact us significantly, or yes?
No one knows, no one can tell. What I'm forecasting is around a potential reduction of around $450,000 in 2025 compared to where I expect 2024 to land, and I don't know if that is accurate or not. It's my best guess.
Okay. Because I'm like, wow, I think I qualify.
Yeah, I suspect some people will, yes, realize
Councilor
that.
Richardson, did you have a?
I have a question. Is the formula that the state uses, is that the Madden formula? Do you all know? Is that right? Okay.
Yes.
Councilor Newman? Councilor Shumway?
One other thing that thank you, Vice Mayor. One thing that I think that we need to watch and be at least aware of is that Senator Harshman is proposing again to tie property tax to a 1% increase in sales tax. So it would go up to 7%, which would kill our opportunity, I think, for us to pass the fifth and sixth cent. If everyone's, if it jumps to 7%, they're not going to be as willing to pay the 6th cent when it comes up for a vote. So that's something that we need to be very cautious about. It would, it would, according to the state, it would be collected by the state, and then the cities and counties would receive backfill. But you know how that went with the food tax. So I think we need to be very cautious that we don't get behind something like that, because it has a lot of question marks as far as communities and counties are concerned.
Thank you, Councilor. Any other questions?
I would just say that that's a really regressive tax too, and so for our community, who is, we have a, not a real high income, we have a lot of lower income folks here, that it's even like more of an impact from my perspective. So.
Thank you, Councilor. All right, back to you.
Thanks, Honorable Mayor. Let's move on to impact assistance payments. As the city manager said, these payments have contributed significant additional one-time revenue sources to the city of Laramie. I just want to give a shout out to Assistant City Manager Fieser, who has spent many hours negotiating great agreements on behalf of the city. We have received $2.1 million to date. We have several million left to come, and I'm happy to report that all of the money we have received to date, I think we've allocated about $1.5 million all to public safety fleet vehicles. We were significantly behind in replacing our fleet. We continue to be a little behind. I think by the end of this biennium, we may be caught up, and that is half due to impact assistance payments. And those public safety response vehicles are always an eligible use based on how those agreements are negotiated. So that really has been helpful, because as we know, those are not cheap acquisitions. Wrapping up the composition of the general fund revenue, I would be remiss if I did not at least acknowledge that your conversations about the storm drainage utility do have an impact on the general fund. They have an impact in that, there is significant significant capital maintenance that needs to be done. And if there is not a rate to support it, by default, that actually falls on the general fund. And so, as you're going through those conversations and thinking about levels of service, I want to make that connection for you. I think you would make that anyway, but it's a good time to point it out. That completes my overview of general fund revenue sources. Before I briefly review the forecast for 24, as well as looking forward to 25 and 26, do you have any questions, any more questions?
Council members, any questions at this point that we haven't already thrown up? Okay.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
As we look forward, what I am forecasting, I'm forecasting us in 2024 to collect $48.1 million in revenue. About $8 million of that will be one-time revenue. And of course, it includes what I'm expecting us to collect for property tax, which is around $2.8 million this year. And so 2024 will be a banner year for general fund revenue. What you'll notice in each of your revenue and expenditure tables this year is that we're presenting to you a forecast for where we think the current fiscal year is going to end. We hope this is helpful to you in evaluating the recommended budget in the case of expenses, or the forecast in the space of revenue. Now, when I look forward to 2025 and 2026 in revenue, there are three sources that were difficult to forecast. The first was property tax. I've already acknowledged what was difficult about it. Sales and use tax, is difficult. Where I have landed initially is about a $14.8 million ongoing sales and use tax for 2025 and $15.3 in 2026. These numbers are slightly below where I expect we will actually land in ongoing collections, but that is how I should be forecasting. But they are not inclusive, as we've said, of any one-time amounts we expect to receive. If you look at the Wyoming Association of Municipalities budget handbook, you'll notice that my projections are a couple $1 million difference. That is because in their budget handbook, what they do is they simply average the last few years of revenue. And there's a caveat that says on the face of it, do not rely on this information if you have had one-time revenue. And so I did check it. I wanted to check it. I always do. And I'm disclosing to you that I'm going to shoot under their recommendation, although we do expect to continue receiving one-time sales and use tax into 2025. The last thing I'd point out to you is that we do have a very conservative placeholder in for revenue for our cooperative agreement for emergency medical services with Ivinson Memorial Hospital. This is just a budgetary number that is a conservative amount that helps us evaluate whether our budget is in balance. It in no way implies anything about our revenue expectations or the negotiations that are ongoing. But that also is a difficult source of revenue to forecast, in particular because it relates to personnel expenses. Of revenue.
Councilors, any questions? Okay, great.
So we're going to move to page 36, and we'll start talking about expenditures. And so you'll see on page 36 and page 37, Council, a
Recommended expenditure by department for the entire general fund. This is a huge chart. It takes up 2 pages. But you'll see, for instance, on page 36, city administration, followed by general government, and then followed by what will look more familiar to you, which aligns with our departments.
police office, fire department, and then
Next page, the police department, Parks and Rec, and then human resources and admin services. In total, the budget being recommended for the first year of the biennium is $44.28 million. In the second year of the biennium, that's down slightly to $38.9 million being recommended. Sorry. No problem. Didn't turn my mic on, bad me. And then at the bottom of that page, you can see those large numbers in the pie chart, kind of showing you just a quick visual of how those expenditures break out across the various service categories of the city. As is typical, the lion's share, usually about half, sometimes a little more than half of all expenditures go to our public safety services. For this biennium, the police percentage is 24% of all expenditures. Fire is 23%. Our next largest category is public works at 12%. Remember, that really is just in terms of services, that's general administration, oversight, project management, and engineering, and then your street and your storm drainage and your fleet functions. A lot of the activities of public works are to be found in the enterprise funds. So now to page 39, if we will. And I wanted to start talking about the actual supplemental requests. So I'm not going to cover the charts that encompass pages 39 through, I think, 42, but I want you to be aware that it's here, because what you're seeing is every change from last year's budget that is being recommended to you in the form of an operating supplemental request. So just as a way of example, if you look at the first row there, municipal court, there is a recommendation for municipal justice software, a little description, kept as brief as we can. What's being recommended for fiscal year '25 is a supplemental or an addition to the budget of $1,450. In fiscal '26, $3,000. And then that final column tells you if this is a one-time thing or if it's an ongoing thing. I think you have a question.
Councilor Doherty, please.
When Director Wade said that being conservative and not everything that was asked for, is this is after that's been whittled down to what you can afford? Okay, thank you.
Yes, through you, Mayor, Councilor Doherty, that is correct. So if you think back to that process table, departments will develop their recommendations, or their requests, I should say. They'll bring them forward. They're vetted out by the budget team and myself, and then winnowed down to what you see here that is finally recommended by the city manager. Yep. So this is here. This is about, I think, 2.5 pages of chart, but it shows you every change that I'm recommending. So I feel like this is always a really helpful chart. Each of these changes is then subsequently discussed in the department-specific section that it falls under. And that's where the department heads, I've invited them to be part of the presentation, and they'll touch on some of these things. In total, the adjustment being recommended for each of the fiscal years is in the first year of the fiscal year, $675,000, and then in the second year of the biennium, $507,000. So well under $1 million. You see those numbers at the top of page 42, which is the end of this 2 or 3 page chart. And I would draw your thoughts to the fact that of a $38 and $44 million fund, an adjustment of, 3/4, 2/3 of $1 million seems small, but that is very purposeful and for the reasons that we've discussed tonight. We have ample resources, I think, to do what we need. You could always do more. We could always do more street work. We could always hire more staff, but we're really trying to take a reasonable position to invest in what we need to do to the best of our ability, but not to really, I would say, kind of grow government at this point until we see where the one-time revenue lands and we see how that may be offset in natural and sustainable ongoing sales tax revenue increases, generosity from the legislature, other things like that.
Councilor Richardson, sorry, City Manager. Go ahead.
Just a couple of things. I'm just curious about on page 40, application software drops, the amount drops in 2026. Is there?
Get to that one.
Just curious as to if you have an idea.
Application software.
It's at the top of page 40.
Well, I hear Jonathan murmuring.
Is that the city clerk one?
Yeah, it's the city, I was just like, it's the city clerk, yeah.
Software in my ears.
Yeah, so typically on that first year of new software, this would be a boards and commission software that would give us the ability to have a more up-to-date way of intaking applications, storing those, and then providing that information out to the counselors that are interviewing. And so usually the first year that you start a new software, there's some integration kind of costs involved, and then it decreases the next year because you're not having to set it up and get the assistance from the software developer.
Great.
Thank you, Councilor.
And then the second point is more just a comment on the staffing part of things. I appreciate you all being so fiscally responsible and making sure that as you move forward, you can cover people's salaries. But I just also, I think I have said this more than once, but just making sure that you all feel like you have the staff that you need to so that people don't burn out. And so I just want to state that again, just as a point.
Thank you, Councilor Richardson. That's a good point. Councilor Newman?
Answer my question.
Okay. Scratch that. I had one question about the employee assistance program. I saw that there's $25,000 there. That's on page 39. But it notes in here that there is a sort of a continual increase in that. And Director Wade will know that I ask about that a lot in Finance Committee as well.
Right.
Is this sufficient? I think this is, to Councilor Richardson's point about burnout, this is sort of like,
Yeah.
one other outlet for that.
Mayor, I appreciate the question and frankly, the concern for staff. What we did just in terms of some history is we've always had an employee assistance program that allowed for up to 3 visits per year per household member that the city pays for, basically those 3 visits for mental health services as employees and their families may need them. When COVID occurred, we upped that to 5 visits, and so what we're doing here is we're making permanent that change, really, and so you see it says ongoing. I'm recommending, what I'd asked for previously was one-time funding to sort of get through the pandemic, but what we've come to realize is our employees are really utilizing this program, and we think it is good to keep providing the program, pandemic or not, and so this will make that permanent. I lost my train of thought. There was one other thing I wanted to say, but it's okay. Anyway, so yes, I'm recommending we make it permanent at 5, and for a lot of the reasons you're saying.
Thank you, City Manager. Yeah, and I agree with you. Councilor Richardson?
I would add on to that, if you feel like it's being fully utilized, I mean, what would it look like to increase that to 1 or 2 more visits for folks?
Yeah, that's a good question. Why don't I? So you will hear, Patty will be here from HR at your next work session, and I'm happy to talk with her about the utilization of the program. You know, we talked about during budget, this is what they requested, this is what I supported, but I could certainly ask a broader question to see if she thinks it might be more, there may be more demand for it than she has asked for in the budget request.
And if not, I mean, obviously no. But
Yeah, and then, so we could talk about some more, but at your next work session, because she's scheduled to be at that one, since we broke it into pieces. Okay.
Thank you, Councilor. Any others? Okay. Back to you, City Manager. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to go back down to the bottom of page 44. What I'll tell you, Council, is as you look at this chart, like if you have questions like this, the department heads will cover their section, and if it's in that department and we have detailed questions, then we can take a deeper dive into it. So as you look at the chart, just file away the questions that you might have for the department heads. I wanted to point out on page 44 where this chart ends, and you see the total recommended supplemental amounts of $673,000 and $506,000. Then there's a next chart down, and these are what we call centrally budgeted adjustments, which I would characterize as this is overhead expense. These are things we don't have a lot of choices about. The budget team that's sitting here with me tonight, they project centrally, and from central administration from finance project these adjustments. So these are things like utility costs, cell phone costs, electricity costs, the expenses for gas, oil, lubricants for our fleet shop and our vehicles, maintenance agreements. As the clerk mentioned, when we purchase software, there's an initial upfront cost, but then there is recurring cost over time for really the subscription for that software, which we call maintenance agreements oftentimes. So in any case, there is an additional centrally budgeted adjustment, as you can see here, of $2.5 million in the first year and $2.2 million in the second year. But what's important to show you here is that the total ongoing adjustments are slightly different. And, oh, sorry, my computer just did a weird glitch thing. Oh, I see where it's at.
City Manager, can you give me a page reference for where you're at?
Yeah, I'm sorry, page 43, I apologize.
Appreciate you.
Yeah, so was I.
Okay, are we on the same page now?
Councilor Doherty, do you have a question?
Yeah, I was wondering about the savings in electricity, letting we get the more efficient machines down at the sewage treatment plant and all the other savings. Where does that fall in here? Is that electric adjustments here, or does it change the overall budget for those? Like, wouldn't it be cool if the water treatment plant,
Yeah.
we could make up for the changes with the savings in energy?
Yeah, and you'll see here, Council, there are downward adjustments here. It's not just up adjustments. So for instance, you see electric adjustments being negative in the brackets, right? Jen, you can take it from there. Okay, okay. Sorry.
No, it was great.
And I guess I should point that out. In the centrally budgeted adjustments, sometimes electricity goes up, sometimes it goes down, sometimes, well, usually cell phones only go up, but there are adjustments both ways, and we did adjust down for electricity. And this in part could have been because we over budgeted in the last biennium, and I think a lot of it, when we looked at it, when we were going through the budget, we were like, whoa, we're not spending that. So these folks will do that analysis. But some of it is likely as well due to our actual expenditure history, where we're seeing adjustments down in electrical costs. And so then we're moving the budget down to meet our actual need and not over budget.
Thank you.
Thanks, Counselor.
I wanted to just, at the bottom of the page there, where you see that roll up, and you see the total bottom, 2.5 and 2.25 in the first and second year respectively. To put that into perspective, I want to point out the very first entry in that chart shows a $1.5 million transfer to the council construction fund. So what is going on there is we're moving money to fund capital construction, and it's not like actually this $2.5 million increase in ongoing operational expenses. And Jen can talk better and more fluently about fund accounting.
You did a good job.
Okay. Okay, with that, I'm going to just finish out by talking about the recommended personnel requests, which are on the next page. And again, a big roll-up chart that shows you everything that's happening in the general fund. The department heads will be able to speak with us about this as well. But just looking at these, I'm going to go through them quickly. In the city clerk, I am recommending a part-time increase that would be ongoing for part-time staff. General accounts, there is a reserve for stipends for folks who are working to implement our software. And you approved in the last biennium an allowance for us to give stipends to folks who are taking on additional lots of temporary work to compensate them for that. In planning, you see 2 positions in planning, 1 in code admin and 1 under community and economic development. All 4 of those positions are part of the same department. And what I'm trying to accomplish here is to properly resource this department to meet the council and the community's economic development objectives. And this is things like what we talked about last night, housing, and really empower us to take a stronger role in that and get this department that we have now reorganized adequately ready to do everything we need them to do. So there is 1 additional permanent FTE for a planner, and that's of course because Director Taney has been promoted, so his position now becomes vacant within the department, his previous position. There's a little bit of part-time dollars so that they can hire some part-time help. There's a half FTE adjustment in code administration. I would point out to you that if you look at the description there, I believe, Jen, this is the position that we had the clerical error on, yes? Correct. So not only am I recommending that they have this additional 0.5 FTE because they need it in an ongoing capacity, but there was a clerical error, and we keep very close tabs on your FTE authorizations. We made a clerical error and overhired somebody, and so we're actually over your FTE authorization temporarily. I do believe it's needed as a permanent matter, and I'm recommending that we bring it into permanent status as an actual full FTE authorization from the City Council. Yeah, please.
I want to add this. Because we have had open positions, we have been able to cover this additional half position with those open positions. But we are forecasting that we are not going to have remaining open positions, so this clerical error must be remedied because there are not positions to transfer. So I don't want you to leave here thinking that this is something that hasn't been disclosed and we haven't had positions to cover it.
Yeah, good point. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Wade.
And then additional FTE in community and economic development for administrative technical support. We're trying to revision this position. Is this your sort of standard administrative assistant, or is this some hybrid of administrative functions crossed over with technical competencies, maybe like in GIS or something like that? But to really get the right help and administrative support for this department, because it is kind of a hybrid, I think, that position should be. That's my opinion. We're working on it with Derek and with HR. In EMS and fire, scrolling down, there are a number of, well, all of the recommendations there are continuing temporary authorizations that you've already given us to try to bridge the gap in our fire EMS service as we sort of renegotiate and come to terms with the hospital on what our future agreement will be and how it will look. Thus far, the city, as you can see here, has spent the last 2.5 years with the onus really on the city to figure out how to bridge the gap in the increasing demand for services, and so we've been putting resources toward that, as you see here. I am recommending that continue at least for the next year, so that we can finalize our negotiations with the hospital. I had hoped, Council, that this would have been determined by the end of the first quarter of this calendar year, so that I would have final and real recommendations for you that were permanent, but we didn't make that goal. Where we're at now is I think that we'll be coming before you with a work session in coming weeks with our consultant to share the findings of their study that we commissioned jointly with Ivinson Memorial Hospital. And hopefully, by the end of the year, we can get this all figured out. That would be really great. Some additional part-time help at the top of the next page recommended for human resources and for the engineering sections. And then looking at Parks and Recreation, I am recommending some ongoing increases to their overtime in the parks cemetery section and to their part-time help. As you know, they use a lot of seasonal folks when work ramps up in the summer times. And what we've seen is with the increases in wages, we need to increase our budget allocation in order to hire those folks. Before the pandemic, we maybe could hire people at $10, $11, $12 an hour. That is not the case anymore. So, and I think that's all of them. Yep. Okay.
City Manager, is there any consideration for increases for lifeguard pay? We hear a lot about lifeguards.
Mayor, that's a great question. So yes, and we're going to talk about that when we get to Parks and Recreation in your next work session, absolutely. What we've been trying to balance, I'll take you back to the city manager's message and the fact that we've made extraordinary subsidies to the rec center for the last 4 years that just really are not sustainable. So I think what has been the struggle is how do we right size and return aquatic services to the level the community wishes, still be able to afford it and not sort of be taking $1 million a year out of the general fund. So anyway, that's part of that conversation, and we'll talk about it some more.
Thank you.
I do believe, though, I will say this just for the record, they've made immediate, I would say, in the last 8 weeks, I think, they've made some changes already to wages out there so that we can get staffed up for the summer.
Okay, thank you.
That won't rely on where I guess I'm trying to say is, changes have already been made within management latitude that will not require you to wait for the budget to be approved.
Thank you. That's good to hear.
Okay, so now we're getting in away from like general stuff on the next page, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my office. And so this is the part where we start to involve our department heads. And so in this respect, at least, I'm acting more as a department head. You see at the top of page 46, City Administration, which encompasses the City Manager's Office, the City Clerk's Office, and the budget for the City Council. There is a slight adjustment recommended in these sections. You can see in the pie chart how they break out. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about some of the things that have occurred, accomplishments toward council goals. You'll see at the bottom of the page, we start to discuss those items, and there are a number of bullet points there. We've been working very hard in my office to bring in grant revenue, notably to fund park and recreation and open space activities, and Todd's been very successful working with his team to bring those in. We recruited new retailers with the agreement with Homebase and Woodbury, and that was finalized in August of 2023. In addition, we've really made a big push to improve city media presence and improve communication between city and residents. We have secured the Reconnecting Communities grant, working with the planning staff. They've been supporting us in that, and we are excited to get that project moving forward. You all are going to hear a lot more about that soon. And then, of course, we secured the grant funding for the transportation plan in my office, and have hired a temporary project manager who will help us to execute that transportation planning process. And then, of course, the Laramie Urban Renewal Agency has been propped up and is doing good work that we hope will yield some pretty fun results for the community and our housing issue. As we look at fiscal '24, I expect we will be, well, no, sorry, I'm still in the past, excuse me. I will skip over that because I want to make sure I leave enough time for Nancy, but you can read it for yourself. If you have questions, you guys know where to find me. Nancy, did you want to talk about anything from your division in terms of accomplishments and goals? Sorry.
It's been a whirlwind of the year. What do we talk about?
I have to say for Nancy, so everyone's been in training, right? Software training, and it's just like this constant grind behind the scenes, and it's an enormous lift. And so they had a week of training that got canceled, 2-3 weeks ago, where so many of our staff are in it, and it's a week of training, right? So you lose kind of the whole week. Well, that got rescheduled due to a sad circumstance of one of the software family member, lost a family member. So now this week, everyone has to rearrange their schedule. So Nancy's been in like software training all day, every day. And then we have 2 meetings both nights this week. And yeah, so I'm sorry, Nancy.
No, that's okay.
I didn't mean to blindside you.
No, you're
They've
fine.
been such casual meetings, too.
I know. I believe it was last year that Ryan got his certification. So as you know, we're both certified municipal clerks at this point. And so we're going to continue working forward towards Masters of Municipal Clerk. It takes a little bit different time and availability to get there. So with the software, it might take us a little bit longer than anticipated, but our hope is that we're going to get there in the next couple of years. So, so we've kind of planned for that in our certifications as well. So. Other than that, I mean, we continue working forward. As you've seen, this might go off award your certifications, but, you know, we're constantly looking for new ways to improve things like the boards and commission software, you know, to kind of keep us moving into that next phase of staying ahead of the game instead of being archaic in our practices, so.
Thank you, City Clerk. Councilor Doherty?
Is the software you're referring to, is that integrated with that enterprise software? This is yet another thing that you have to learn. Okay.
Yeah, yet another
Fun times.
software. Right. Council, you'll see after the city clerk's discussion about goals, her office's progression toward your goals and separately then toward management goals. Usually those are complementary, but oftentimes management goals can be a little bit different. Like for instance, you'll see in my office, I talked about the fact that in the past few years, we've hired and onboarded 2 brand new department heads, right? So something that's just a normal course of business, but a big issue for management and a goal of ours that may or may not touch upon council's policy goals. Yes? No, please.
Since we're talking about software.
Since I blindsided you.
Yeah. Just to let you know, we are also looking at trying to get some of our records over to state archives, which is part of why we asked for an increase in staffing. You know, we have had 20-plus years of records in the basement that we've been trying to consolidate and bring to records retention time periods and just get it all in order. So part of that effort is to work with state archives to get some of our records transferred over there, but they also have a software that we can take some of our permanent records and upload it to their software for recording purposes. It also makes those records available to the public. So it's kind of twofold. It gets it kind of a second although we have like 3 backups, it gives us another backup, but it also gives the public yet another way to access those records too. So that's another thing that we're working towards in the next couple of years.
Thank you, City Clerk. Councilor Richardson, please.
Just out of curiosity, will those records then, I guess there's probably a timeline that you have to keep them on hand in the building, so just ignore my question, sorry.
No, it's okay. Well, Wyoming State Archives has a retention schedule, and so depending upon what your record is, determines how long we have to keep it. And most of those don't necessarily have to be kept in-house per se, like if it's a permanent record, we could transfer it over there. However, it's good at least until we have our digital records, that we keep it here probably. So I would imagine there would probably be a certain amount of time we'd keep some of those. A lot of them are working records, and so like business licenses, things like that are like a 5-year after expiration that you retain them. So those records wouldn't go to state archives because we would want to keep those close so we can just keep them rotating probably. However, those are all going digital too, which helps with records retention, so.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Pierce, please.
Yeah, just generally, so when you're talking records, you're talking all, like what's going on in Public Works and all the departments, right? So.
Yeah, so we had
not just your office and your records.
Yeah, so our office retains everything city council related, but then, yeah, we have stuff all over the city for records. Every department has city records and stuff. So Jonathan has also been working, trying to help figure out the emails and the records retention on all of that kind of stuff. So we've had every department that was available to attend a training last year with state archives to just kind of try to make sure that we're all up to date and what best practices are and how to keep those records. So yeah, everything written becomes a record that then we have to consider what retention period does that meet.
Yeah. At UW, having looked at the retention schedule there, that document is over 100 pages long, just for UW alone. I don't know if it's the same document or something similar, but that's a big deal. And, having spent time looking at all those records in different departments over the years at UW, it's a nightmare of what has to get sent to, in UW's case, it's to the archives office, basically. They have their own, and a bunch of people just working there to keep all the records in order, so. Yeah, and I think about Sue Morris Jones, and all her handwritten things when she was, remember all, yeah. So it's like, oh, man. Okay.
Moved on.
Yeah.
Thanks, Councilor. City Manager.
Council, I wanted to point out to you that your budget is part of this division, and starting on page 48, we did take the liberty of listing out the accomplishments made toward your established goals and priorities, and we hope we did a thorough job. Takes up like 4 pages, so it must be pretty thorough. I won't go over all of that, but just wanted to point out that your goals and objectives are reflected here under your section of the budget. And let's see.
We could have thrown it last night.
There were just a few supplementals recommended in this department. Boy, my computer keeps doing this weird thing. I guess it's actually me pushing the wrong button. But if you look at the total roll-up there, you'll see just a few minor adjustments between line items in the city manager's office cost center, and then in the city clerk's office cost center as well. Most of the change is that you're seeing reflected from past years into the future budget years is related to personnel expense, so salaries, benefits, and those sorts of things. And then
Can you give us a page number, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. I went back in the budget book. So we're on page 46, where the department starts. So for each section, You'll see the opening chart that shows you what the budget is. You see your 22 actual, 23 actual, year-to-date actual, and then the current year projected, and then the budget recommendation for those future years in the rightmost columns.
Thank you, City Manager.
I would say, in general, all three of these cost centers, manager's office, clerk's office, and council, are pretty stable and steady, and there's not a lot of change here other than just keeping up with ongoing expenses and changes in personnel and in compensation, not personnel, excuse me. And I think you had a question,
Councilor
Mayor.
Newman, please.
Is there going to be enough in the budget for like looking forward? Because I know we get our pay raise and then we can get like cell phones and stuff. Will that be in this budget as well?
I believe that was accounted for in the council's budget. Yes, I hear. Yeah, just everyone's like, we're all like, we did that, right? Yeah, yes, we did that.
Thank you, Councilor.
Okay. So this section appears to be very lengthy, but it's actually it is a lengthy section, but it's a really tiny part of the budget overall. But because we wanted to make sure that we captured the work that's gone towards your goals, it's long. So if you go forward a number of pages to page 59, this is where we're going to get out of order in the budget book, and that's because we had to account for staff schedules. Some people couldn't be here tonight and can be here at the next meeting. So we're going to go forward to page 59, and we have Director Rhodes here to cover the information technology pages and talk to you about what's happening in his department.
Good evening. So some of the accomplishments and goals and things that we're continuing to work on, council related, and working with the city manager's office, we're implementing a app to allow volunteer opportunities throughout the community. We have it set up. Brandon continues to work on that and training and whatnot, and that's something that will continue on into the next fiscal year, so that we're excited for that. And then in general with IT, just working on security, making sure everything is available and working and not ransomware, and that type of thing, and making technology easier to use for our citizens and for staff as well. And so we're involved with, the various software projects that have gone on with that. One of the projects on the capital side that we talked about as well, relates to backups and making sure our data is backed up. As far as supplementals for this year, I think those are on page 42 for IT. The largest one is an ongoing increase to provide our boards and commission members with a city email address for them to use instead of them using a personal email address. By doing that, we talked about state retention records and whatnot. Should we get some type of public records request related to boards and commissions, if they're using a city email address, it's much easier for us to take that data, search it, provide it, should we have a request, and also archive that data for whatever state retention laws are for the type of data that it turns out to be. So that's the largest request. And we have within there's about 101 boards and commission members who would then get a city email address. And there may be some additional things that need to happen as far as we call rules of within boards and commissions that maybe come before you guys, that you guys maybe change some of the rules of, hey, you need to use a city email address if you're going to serve on this boards and commission. That way we maintain that. And that would be coming to you at a future time if there's any changes that need made related to that. And then just some software increases, because sometimes things cost more, and so we adjust for that. But overall, not super high on those. I open it for any questions if you have any.
Council members, Councilor Pierce, please.
Yeah, I seem to be talking a lot tonight.
That's great.
I think that's smart, especially for board and commission members. I think it will really reinforce the public nature of what they do if they're using a public email, right? I think that will be very, oops, I see this blinking light. I think that'll be very good. So thank you for that consideration. I suspect it will be, a lot more on and off of people, so maybe perhaps a little more effort, but I think in the long run, it'll be good.
Director Rhodes, would it be, sorry, go ahead, Councilor Nunn. I'll wait.
I think it'd be easier to get a hold of some of them as well. That way, because we don't know if they're using their personal email or, whichever one. So I do really like that idea.
Great. And Director Rhodes, would they be, then you would just honor system, like I suppose is all we do now, right? Like if a record is requested and they use their personal email, we just have to hope they turn it over. But that's the case now, right? So this is just.
Mayor, correct. Same with council. You guys have personal emails and city emails. We would encourage you to use your city email for city business. If you choose not to, that I can't control that. And similar with boards and commissions. And this came from the clerk's office as a recommendation. So she on top of that and making sure we do those appropriately.
Yeah, well, thank you both. It's a great idea. Okay.
It'll take quite a bit of work from IT.
I imagine.
Just,
Setting up the accounts, and then, the turnover, I don't know what that turnover looks like. You deal with that more. So there'll be a learning curve for staff on that and how to get the emails to the commission members and reset passwords if they need it and provide a little bit of support to make sure they can get it. Hopefully it'll work well, and that'll be a learning curve for us though.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, well, may the force be with you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's Pierce.
No, I mean, I'm just going to say email's not new, so even, hopefully it should be a pretty easy learning curve.
And the platform we use, Mayor, is Office 365. Most people are familiar with it. It's pretty common, so hopefully that would make it easy as well.
Thank you. Other questions? Okay, thank you, Director Rhodes.
So Mayor, in total in IT, I'm recommending $94,000 adjustment in the first year, $59,000 adjustment in the second year. The reason for the difference is that one of those, $35,000 of that is a one-time expenditure in the first year of the biennium. The boards and commissions piece will be $32,000 as an ongoing expense based on what we know right now. And I was remiss, I should have given you the amounts within the city manager, clerks, and council budgets. So let me scroll back up and I will do that. So for the city manager's office, there is supplementals recommended of about, the net of them is about $6,000, I think. We're adjusting office supplies down. We're adjusting travel costs up to allow for our management analysts to travel to WAM and a couple other Mountain Towns 2030 and a couple conferences, and then licenses and permits is being adjusted up slightly. And this is just because we haven't made any real adjustments in that line item, and costs have gone up, as Jonathan says. For city council, I'm recommending the adjustment as an ongoing matter of membership dues by $1,500. It's a fairly small amount, but that came from the city clerk so that we could cover National League of Cities, Municipal Association dues, those sorts of things, which also often increase from time to time. And the clerk's office, sorry, different page, have to move up. I mentioned already in the clerk's office that I was recommending the adjustment to part-time to give some additional money so she can hire staff to help with records retention. We talked about the application software for the board and commission application process already. The total amount of that is $7,350 and then $5,828. We also adjusted down in the second year of the budget for a decrease in maintenance fees. So I guess not everything always costs more. Sometimes every now and then they cost less. Legal advertising is something that we see go up pretty much every single year, and so Nancy had brought forward, and I'm recommending an $8,000 increase in the budget for that. We're purchasing a desk for one of the employees as a one-time expense, and I did recommend that, and then some adjustments to the cost of meals, and to $25,000 as a one-time budget for 24 elections, as we are in an election year. Anything else? So that covers the amounts related to the changes in that division. And if there are no questions for Jonathan or for me, I think we're going to close the evening out hearing from Director Wade about administrative services. And that is on page, this is where we skip forward again, 76.
No questions, council? Okay, Director Wade.
If the council will indulge me for just 1 minute, I'd like to do a brief calculation before I start my presentation, because I just thought of something cool. Okay, thank you for that.
Of course, she's doing math.
So what even is administrative services? I feel like I have to answer that question. We colloquially are called finance a lot, and that's actually really unfair to our friends in municipal court administration. And so we actually are comprised of 2 divisions, one of which is finance. And finance is comprised of both what we would call our customer operations team. That's, sometimes we call that utility billing, but it really isn't that. Of course, they do administer utility billing for the city, but they also provide customer service. They do all the parking permits in the fall, and they just provide a general point of contact. And so we prefer to call them our customer operations team, as well as back-end finance. And so that's the budget and the accounting and the accounts payable and receivables. So I'd like to make sure I point out the 2 sides of finance. And so when you hear me say finance, it is absolutely both sides of that coin. We also house the municipal court. So in our budget, you'll see not only the budget for the administration of justice, which falls under administrative services, but also the budget for your appointed judge. And so the way I'd like to talk about that, of course, is that you all appoint that judge, and he is responsible for, let's say, justice. And what we do in administrative services is really the administration of justice. And that actually takes a lot of skill and knowledge to keep the tabs on the judge's orders and the attorneys and the back and forth and the court scheduling. And it's really a beautiful thing. If you've never watched that in action, it's pretty cool, and I encourage you to do so. So I want to make sure I shout out to both sides equally. There's been a lot going on this year, clearly, and we'll talk about finance first. We've had a lot of stability in our customer operations team. Our supervisor continues to get the final pieces of mentorship from Sean Klein, who, as you know, is promoted to Deputy Director of Public Works. That mentorship should be completed in the next month, and he will be fully standing alone, which is very exciting. We've had a lot of transition in administrative services, and that was certainly a material one when you lose 20 years of service to another department and onboard a brand new employee. That the customer operations team is very happy and very stable, which I feel incredibly blessed by, because sometimes in customer service positions, they're very demanding. Right? And they are the first line of calls for our customers, our utility customers, many of which are not happy. And they do it with grace and dignity and tact, and I'm always super impressed. And so I'm happy that in a year of lots of transition in back-end finance, that customer operations side has been stable. And I'm really grateful to Billy and his team for that. Now, if we think about back-end finance, of course, what we've been doing is implementing software, and that's what we're going to do for years. It's just the name of our game. But what's more significant about that to me is that we did that with 5 of 7 authorized positions, and that's what I was calculating. At 70% staffing, we rolled out a highly successful ERP finance project. We had no major issues post-go live. We have high user adoption. We're tired. I think everyone is tired. I bet Nancy's tired, and so is Brooks. And we could use a little break. But it went off swimmingly, and I just think that is so impressive, because it does not happen without people who understand that the city is making, and you all are making, a multi-million-dollar investment to bring our business systems forward, and they have a choice every day. They can come to work and they can half do it, because that's a lot easier. And honestly, it's kind of how the software companies implement. Or they can take it to the next level, and they can really try, and they can build a content library and deliver 50 end user training sessions and have more or less perfectly built functionality for what we designed, and that's really impressive, especially at 70% staffing. And so that has been our biggest accomplishment of the past year, in addition to our banking change and investment strategy change. And so that change alone has generated to date in 2024 $1 million more across all city funds. We'll continue retooling that in next fiscal year and trying to do even better with the resources that we have when they are sitting idle and are not yet spent towards one of your goals.
Please go ahead.
I was thinking the newer members might not know what the banking change was. Was that, do you already, it was this council? Never mind, thanks.
Thanks, Councilor.
Thank you. In addition, I should also point out the hard work to implement the health insurance change. I know that sounds like a benign thing, like onboarding new directors, but it is quite a bit of administrative work, and I want to acknowledge both Louise and Jen, Louise in particular, who bore a lion's share of that work. At a time when I was doing a different project, because that's how it's been, is all year we just toss about who's going to do what project. And I'm really grateful that we have enough competent people to do that, because otherwise it just wouldn't work. And it is a heavy, heavy lift. And when I say heavy lift, I'm talking like at least 160 hours of labor just to do that health insurance change. And so when you combine that with software and the other things, it's just really impressive in my opinion. As I look forward to 2025 and 2026, clearly we're going to keep implementing software. We're also clearly going to keep prioritizing long-term financial planning because it's incredibly important to this community and every community across the nation that we can continue to provide government services. We'll also be, of course, advising on various business plan and rate development initiatives, notably stormwater, wastewater, water, and solid waste, and so we'll be members of those teams. Additionally, we'll be working together to develop with the City Manager's Office benchmarks for financial and budget transparency using some of our new software functionality. And finally, I'd like to highlight that I will be bringing the city's, 25-year-old investment policy to you all for a revision. So you may know that the governing body is in charge of setting the city's investment policy. Ours is long overdue. I actually had a draft of it ready for you about a year ago and then decided to pull that. We had a change in council happening at about the same time. In addition, the legislation hadn't quite settled in terms of how we could invest. And really all of that needed to calm down before I could bring another investment policy to you. So you get to decide how we invest our public funds. And that will be what we do. And we'll take a look at that together later in the year, and I'm sure that will be an excellent conversation. When I look at the municipal court, of course, one of their main successes for the last year was onboarding a new judge. They prepared a manual, they welcomed him in, everything with that transition went off without a hitch, which I was very grateful for, especially with a younger team. They really embraced that effort. They also have really supported the implementation of the Albany County Diversion Program. And so they, of course, work with the judge and the city attorney's office to provide some of that support. And I know are talking about ideas now about how to get the word about that program out, including some brochures at the counter and potentially some in Spanish as well. And so they have some good ideas, and that's a good team, and they'll continue to work on those efforts into the next year, along with making sure that their relationship with the city attorney's office is one that is efficient and effective, but appropriate given the separation that has to be present between those two groups. That's all I've got. I'm happy to answer questions.
Councilors, any questions? Okay. Thank you, Director Wade.
Okay. Council, that wraps up the material that we had planned to cover tonight. At your next work session, we will start off with Community and Economic Development Department. We'll work through Public Safety, Parks and Recreation, Public Works, and HR. And then we will spend just a couple moments looking at the other funds, as we call them, the more minor funds. That is a big body of information to still kind of get through. We have, I think, 2 work sessions after this one. I'm going to try to get through that material at your next work session, but we have that 3rd work session as an overflow option if we do not get through all of the material, so.
Great. Thank you, City Manager.
And if you're okay with ending at 8 after our long week, we are okay with that too. I didn't want to plan too much for tonight because I
Yeah,
knew
that's
you'd
great.
be on your second night of meetings.
Yeah, that's great. Council members, I imagine you have like, what, an hour or 2 of updates, council comments? Okay. All right, we'll go to the public on this work session. If there's any member of the public wishing to speak to this, please go ahead and raise your hand or come forward in the room. Seeing none, I'll close public comments. Council, we're going to go through updates and comments quickly. Councilor Somerville, any updates or comments? Councilor Somerville, did you have any updates or comments? Okay. Councilor O'Doherty?
The Laramie Advisory Commission on Disabilities met last week, and we have our chair back in the chair. Her son passed away. Her son, who had a disability, passed away, and there's going to be a celebration of his life on May 18th. Her family wants to put a bench or something at the new accessible playground. And the commission, not officially, but while we were waiting for people to come in, expressed concern about losing that parking lot downtown, which I should have brought up if I were a better liaison. Should have brought it up last night, because the ADA parking is not that easy downtown. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Shumway, do you have any updates or comments? Microphone.
I have comments. I'd like to.
Councilor, can you flip on your microphone? Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I have some comments I'd like to make, but we're going to do that following the updates. Right? Okay. We have an event. It's called the sesquicentennial, which means 250 years since the Constitution, since the forming of the United States of America. And there's going to be money given to each of the 23 counties. We're going to be getting about, as I recall, Janine, it's going to be something like $30,000 to $40,000 in that ballpark.
Yes.
And
Didn't they say, oh, I'm sorry, didn't they say the state appropriated $2 million total?
Right.
Yeah, okay.
And then we need to find someone to head that up with suggestions on how we could spend that. One thought that we had initially is, one of the celebrations we have each year is called Fire in the Sky, where we celebrate on the 4th of July. That would pay the entire $29,000 or whatever we've been doing on that. But that's something that we need to work with the county on, finding somebody that will spearhead that and get ready for the semi-sesquicentennial, 250 years since 1776. So looking forward to having that celebration in 2 years, 2026. And then we had the final meeting with the Laramie Youth Council. I'm not going to go into that because we've got 2 other people that attended that meeting, and I want them to have something to report on.
Okay. Councilor Pierce?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Tomorrow is our second meeting of the Ranch Advisory Commission regarding fleshing out plans for future projects on the ranch. So if any of you, want to attend or have suggestions or just let me know. Big topics, of course, are, and I think I talked a little bit about this last time, was like testing the water from when it comes over, the Laramie River, when it comes over from Colorado, and then as it progresses through the irrigation onto the ranch. And then we're fortunate to have Dr. Williams, and I think he's a soil scientist by trade, used to be retired dean of the College of Ag, and he's he's really good with knowing soil. So that's exciting. He's given us papers to read, and I'm like, oh my God, they're pretty, you know. He goes, just read the first page, the last page, and I'm like, well, that's how I got through grad school. I guess that'll work, you know. And yeah, so that's nice. So we'll be talking more about that, and yeah, and working on those partnerships. But anyway, that's the ranch group. Then the Laramie Urban Renewal Agency meets tomorrow night. I suspect they were probably pretty darn hopeful related to our evening meeting, our last night's meeting. So they will hopefully get a new project to dig into. And I know we've got, Janine, you might know, but we've got the RFPs in for the North 4th Street. I think they're working on reviews of that now.
That is correct. I think they've done, I know of at least one level review last week with the review committee, two proposals.
Yeah, so I'm not exactly sure where they are in that process. The committee chose Fred Schmeckel to be part of the process of reviewing those applicants. So, and like I said, we meet again tomorrow night. They're quite an amazing group of folks. They're really high-level workers, and yeah, I mean, it's just like I'm the behind person for that group. But they come in and they're very prepared, and their meetings are well organized and well run. And Todd's there for backup, and I'm just there for, just to sit there, I guess. But they do a good job, and they do amazing work. And even things like working on the webpage, a city webpage, to explain TIF financing and all these things. They've got such great ideas. I think they're working with Todd pretty closely to go forward with a lot of those projects. So I think that's great. And that's it for me. I'll have an update for the rifle range probably in a couple weeks.
Great.
So yeah.
Cool.
But that's it.
Thank you, Councilor Pierce. I mentioned to you all last time that we were at the deadline for the Pilot Hill review for the trailhead. It did clear staff, so they have a final plan allowed by the city for construction of that trailhead. I think we will all be quite proud of it, and they're hoping to get after it this summer. I don't know if they'll complete it, but they will be working towards completing it this summer. And Airport Board met this morning, not much by way of updates. They are having some of the same ongoing problems. So you may all expect some emails. They will come as nothing new, but I think one important update, there are no longer any FAA compliance issues at the airport. So, so 45 or something cleared up in the last couple of years of
47.
Yeah, 47 maybe. A whole pile of them. So things are looking up, and there is obviously ongoing work to do out there, but as it goes, there will be people pushing back on it. So that's what I have. Vice Mayor, sorry.
Can I have a question? I know a lot of the records were just non-existent. So has any of that audit, are we past all that information with the audit coming back?
Yeah, we're back to a place where funds have been audited, and now there is, I was on the airport board, I was off for a while, and I'm back on, and in that time, this is the first time we've been able to talk about real numbers.
Wow.
So they have completed a pretty significant audit.
Good.
With a lot of missing parts, but they're through it. So
Excellent.
yeah, good question.
Thank
Vice
you.
Mayor.
I have a couple. Let's see, and these were all yesterday. So Town and Gown met, and we met with the President Seidel and last year, and the decision was to disband Town and Gown, and then to revamp it. We attended, the mayor and city manager attended the meeting, and there was a general consensus that they wanted it to have a broader scope and to address more things, that it had become extremely focused on prevention and not including other parts of the city. So we have completed a lengthy training with the International Town and Gown Association, and so those who attended will receive a certificate. And it was most of representatives from WyoTech, from LCCC, from the college, and from the city, and from the county, and from law enforcement. So it was very well represented. We created a structure for the future that will include an executive committee. Those will be the heads of the unit of the educational. It'll be heads. It'll be people that have their hands on the money and the power. And so they'll meet once a year, and then underneath that is a steering committee. And the steering committee has divided into 4 subcommittees, and I'll keep this as short as I can. Transportation and safety, that includes all of the chiefs and the sheriff. Number 2, housing and neighborhood relations, and that's LPD and Ryan O'Neill. Number 3, prevention, which is substance abuse, suicide, mental health, sexual assault, and that'll be Andrew Terrell and Jennifer Nur. And the 4th is economic development, and that'll be Tracy Young and I've been asked to serve. Those individuals serve as co-chairs, and then they will begin to build their subcommittees with individuals from, relevant individuals from the community. So we're moving right along. We've been asked by, we did develop a vision statement. Connecting our community and finding common ground through higher education and community partnerships. So that came out of our meeting, and we feel that that's just the beginning, and that will begin to transform and grow as we work. But right now, we're just really starting to build those connections. We have been requested by International Town and Gown Association to present the restructuring and organizational work that we've been doing at their national conference, which will occur June 5th in Maryland. And so a number of the group will be representing the city and presenting as a panel. So that's very exciting. The second meeting was the Laramie Police Advisory Board, and we had our really first item of work where the committee was requested to review a request that they are going to make for funding. And they went through, they have done research and analysis on the rifles, and the rifles for LPD are about 24 years old, which far exceeds expected life of a rifle. And they went in and did research and visual camera of the barrels, and they randomly selected throughout the entire force, and they found problems with every single one. And so they presented to us, and we'll get the full presentation coming, but the bottom line is that they need to replace 50 rifles, and they talked about how the rifles are so much more accurate that for certain situations, you really do not want to use a handgun. A rifle is preferable because there's less danger of harming bystanders, et cetera. And in a hostage-type situation, they're very accurate. And I don't know as much about guns as some of you do. So they did a good bit of research in trying to find replacement, and they were able to find a supplier in Cheyenne, and the total is going to be about $64,000 for the 50 rifles, and they have given them a deal on suppressors because the noise is so intense it can cause significant temporary and permanent hearing loss, and the temporary hearing loss becomes a danger if they're in a situation they fired the rifle and then they can't hear anything for seconds, then they may miss critical stuff. So this company did make a very good deal for them compared to what you might find. And so will be coming to us shortly, the request, and the chief will do the presentation on that.
Councilor Pierce.
Yeah, thank you. In review, this has to do with the town and gown. So in reviewing the UW trustees' notes and agenda today for their meeting today and tomorrow, there's a whole section in there about ASUW and some of the things that they've accomplished, some of the questionnaires that they've sent out to students. And if anybody wants to get online and take a look, there's a section in there about students' responses related to rentals. So and it just made me think of it, and I should have said it before, but I think was quite interesting. And I didn't read everything word for word, but it was interesting survey responses. So as just a side note, because they're on the front line, I don't know if there's a student organization at WyoTech that does, very similar questionnaires, but it was interesting, and I need to go and spend a little more time to really dig deeper in what those responses were.
Thanks, Councilor Pierce. Councilor Doherty.
Would you mind forwarding that to the clerk to send to us so we can find the link? Because
yeah, it's probably in the weeds, and I can I'll do it tomorrow.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And is anybody from ASUW on any of those organizations?
They have not been in attendance at this point in time, so I appreciate you bringing that up, because I wonder if that's something that we have not thought about, or if people are considering including student representation in each of those subgroups. So I appreciate you bringing that up, because it has not been mentioned. So.
Sometimes they like to keep them quiet.
Yeah.
Anything else, Vice Mayor?
That's it.
Okay. Councilor Newman? Oh, forgive me. Sorry. Does somebody have a question?
I was just curious, when was the town hearing?
Yesterday. It was right before the next meeting, right before last night's meeting.
Okay, thank you. I don't know.
Happened that way.
Yeah, I don't know what the issue is with invitations for that meeting, but this is like the fourth meeting I've not been notified of. So I will reach out to Tracy again. Thank you.
Okay.
I think that you are going to be assigned to the executive committee.
Congratulations.
Well, that's the problem with missing a meeting, right? Then they give you work to
The
do.
executive committee would be the city manager and possibly the mayor. But you may want to be on one of the steering committees. You may want to attend those, so I will remind her. But as we were breaking it up, I think we assigned you to the executive committee, which gives you, by the way, far fewer meetings.
No, that's fine. I was just more dismayed that I wasn't there, so thank you.
But that's why.
Thank you, Cindy.
And Mayor, I would just point out too that since we have a new ASUW president and vice president, maybe this would be the time to get those individuals involved.
Yes.
Good idea, Counselor.
They typically come and give us a presentation too, don't they?
But it won't be for some time, right? So,
Usually in the fall.
Is it fall? Is it the fall?
so maybe we chat. Counselor Newman?
Youth Council met for the last time of the school year. They should be in front of us in a couple weeks. Is that right, Nancy?
If you want one of them to come, the 21st, I think, is what we were going to.
Said they were going to come and
Yeah.
present something to us for our consideration, which is kind of cool to see. We did a team building exercise, and
We were last.
yeah, it was the 3 council members, the liaisons, and then 2 other groups of, we didn't win. We were nowhere.
I will say this, we were in third until the last second.
And then, so what the team building exercise was you had spaghetti noodles and marshmallows, and it was who could build the tallest tower. We were winning until Nancy said, time, and then ours just like, but it was a lot of fun, and it was really fun to work with those guys this year. So we did ask them, because there's, I think, a couple seniors, if they were going to continue into politics. One of them, who was my daughter, said no. And then quite a few of them said yes. So the future is bright for those guys.
That's great. Thank you, Counselor Newman. Your daughter's just a little too close to it already.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, she sees what I deal with, and she's like, no, Dad.
She's feeling the stress too.
I just want to say, I was so impressed with the activities that you all did and the work that you all did with those students. And I think you gave them such a broad exposure. So I really appreciate the work that you did.
That really goes to Nancy.
Yeah,
That goes to Nancy. Yeah,
Always.
yeah. Can't take much credit
And I
there.
think their willingness,
It was a good,
their
it
willingness.
seemed like such a good group.
So.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Richardson?
Yeah, I will echo that it was a lot of fun. My boards and commissions all meet next week. So,
Have a good week.
thank you.
Counselor Gabriel?
We have one opening on the Planning Commission, the Vice Mayor, myself, and Councilor Richardson interviewing the last candidate tomorrow. So we should have a recommendation to the council at our next meeting.
Yep.
Thank you all for doing those interviews. Thank you, Counselor. All right. I think it's Sharon Buccino.
Oh, this is to
Maybe?
fill Sharon's?
Oh, no, this is Chris Dixon.
Oh, right. Okay, thank you. All right. That wraps us up on updates and comments. Council members, we do not have an agenda to review, so we're going to skip that. And we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Okay, 8:20, not